"Ma'am, this cabin is not for you." The words came out clean and certain the way a man speaks when he has never once been questioned. Captain Roy Harlan stood in the galley doorway with his arms crossed and his chin lifted, silver wings gleaming on his chest under the cabin lights. He didn't check a manifest. He didn't consult a screen. He looked at the woman standing in the aisle with her boarding pass in one hand and her bag in the other, and he made a decision in the time it takes to blink. He had faded denim eyes that held no warmth. Only the flat, bureaucratic certainty of a man who had appointed himself the final word on who belonged where. His uniform was immaculate, every crease sharp, every button seated. He wore his authority the way some men wear cologne, applied heavily left everywhere he went. He had been a captain for 19 years. In those 19 years, no one in this cabin had ever successfully argued with him. He intended to keep that record intact. The words hung in the recycled cabin air. "Not for you." Not, "There has been an error." Not, "Let me check on that for you." Not even the thin courtesy of pretending to look. Just the 4 words delivered from the doorway like a verdict already written, already signed, already filed. The woman he said them to did not flinch. She did not gasp. She did not look around the cabin for help or confirmation or someone to tell her that what she had just heard was as wrong as it felt. She simply held his gaze with eyes that had catalogued the moment completely. The words, the tone, the posture, the particular flavor of dismissal she had been encountering since she was 12 years old, and a teacher told her that engineering was a difficult field for someone like her. She had heard this before. Not always these exact words. Sometimes it was a look. Sometimes it was a question wrapped inside a compliment. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" Sometimes it was the 2-finger hold on a credit card as if it might contaminate the holder. She knew the pattern. She had been reading it her entire life. What was different tonight was not the insult. What was different tonight was what she was going to do about it. She stood perfectly still in the aisle of North Star Airways Flight 1942, bound for San Francisco, a Bombardier CRJ-900 operating under the Apex Executive Aviation banner at JFK's Terminal 4. Her boarding pass was for seat 1A. It had been issued by the airline. It had been confirmed at the gate 4 minutes ago by a woman named Sophia, who had smiled at her and said, "Have a wonderful flight." Captain Roy Harlan did not know what he had just set into motion. What he did not know, could not have known standing there in his pressed uniform with his arms crossed and his verdict delivered, was that in exactly 51 minutes he would be escorted off this aircraft by the woman he had just dismissed. And she would not raise her voice once. Let's pause right here. Let's stay in this moment for just a breath. Because what you just witnessed in that galley doorway was not a misunderstanding. It was not a policy error. It was not a paperwork mix-up or an innocent mistake made by a tired man at the end of a long shift. It was a choice. Captain Roy Harlan looked at a black woman with a valid boarding pass for the best seat on his aircraft and decided without a single piece of evidence to support the decision that she did not belong there. He said 4 words. He crossed his arms. He waited for her to retreat. That was the plan. That had always been the plan. It had worked before, many times. In the small, enclosed aluminum kingdom of a regional jet, the captain is the law, and Roy Harlan had been the law for 19 years without anyone making him answer for it. Tonight was going to be different. In exactly 51 minutes from the moment those 4 words left his mouth, Dr. Amara Osei would not file a complaint with customer service. She would not ask to speak to a supervisor. She would not post an angry update from a gate chair and hope it went somewhere. She was not built for hoping. She was built for solving. She would make one phone call. And by the time that phone call concluded, Captain Harlan would no longer have a plane to stand in. The wings on his chest would mean nothing. The uniform would be just fabric. The faded denim eyes would have nothing left to project certainty at, because the ground would have shifted beneath his feet so completely that he would spend the next year trying to understand how a conversation that lasted less than 3 minutes had cost him everything he had spent 30 years building. She didn't want an apology. Apologies were cheap. Apologies were what Airline sent with a coupon code and a form letter and a request that you rate your experience on a scale of 1 to 10. Apologies changed nothing about the man who would still be standing in that doorway the next day, and the day after, and the day after that, making the same decision about the next woman who stepped onto his plane with a valid boarding pass and the wrong appearance. What Dr. Amara Osei wanted was something Roy Harlan had not considered possible. She wanted the company. All of it. The planes, the routes, the gates, the ground crews, the contracts, the brand, the headquarters in Scottsdale, the regional subsidiary, the entire corporate structure, from the CEO's corner office down to the employee parking lot where Roy Harlan's car was sitting right now, waiting to take him home from what he still believed was a routine flight. But before any of that, before the phone call, before the lawyers, before the moment the world tilted on its axis inside a regional jet at JFK, you need to understand who this woman is. Because the mistake Roy Harlan made tonight was not just a moral failure, it was a strategic catastrophe. And the reason it was a catastrophe, the reason 51 minutes was all it took, had everything to do with a girl from Cleveland who took apart a microwave at age 12. A woman who walked across a stage at MIT with a doctorate and a plan, and a founder who had converted every single underestimation she had ever encountered into fuel for something larger than herself. You need to know who she is, because once you do, you'll understand exactly why Roy Harlan never stood a chance. 90 minutes before any of this happened, Dr. Amara Osei was sitting alone in the Meridian Club Lounge in Terminal 4 at JFK, watching planes move on the tarmac in the last light of a Tuesday evening. The lounge smelled of fresh espresso and expensive leather, and the faint ghost of someone else's expensive perfume. The lighting was the particular shade of amber that designers choose when they want people to feel both relaxed and important. Warm enough to soften edges, dim enough to suggest exclusivity. The carpet was thick. The chairs were real leather, not the imitation kind. The floor-to-ceiling windows gave a wide, unobstructed view of the tarmac below, where ground crews moved in precise patterns around aircraft with the practiced economy of people who have done the same thing 10,000 times and still do it correctly every time. Amara appreciated that. The precision, the competence of ordinary people doing difficult work without fanfare. She was the only black woman in the lounge. She registered this the way she registered most things, completely without drama, filing it alongside the other data points the room was continuously offering her. The two white businessmen at the bar who had glanced at her when she walked in, and then looked away, and then back again, with the particular expression of people trying to figure out if she was someone they were supposed to recognize. The lounge attendant, who had hesitated 1/2 second too long before approaching her, then overcorrected with excessive warmth. The small, unconscious choreography of a world that had been built without her in the blueprints. She was used to it. That didn't mean it was invisible. It just meant she had long since stopped letting it determine how she occupied a room. She occupied it fully. She sat in the best chair by the best window with her Birkin bag beside her on the adjacent seat. Not as a display, but because it contained, among other things, the signed contracts from the deal she had just closed in Zurich 48 hours ago. A 9-figure agreement. 10 years. Her composite fiber material as the new thermal shielding standard for next-generation satellite construction and deep space probes. The kind of deal that takes 3 years to architect and 2 days to sign, and a lifetime to earn the credibility to propose. The Birkin was not a trophy. It was a work bag. It happened to be a very good one. On her wrist was a steel Longines. Not the most expensive watch in the lounge, not by a significant distance. She had bought it for herself the day her first patent was approved 15 years ago, in a small office in Baltimore with a rented desk and a borrowed microscope, and $40,000 in savings that represented everything she owned. She had worn it every day since. It told time. It reminded her where she started. Both functions felt necessary. She was tired in the way you are tired after something monumental. Not the exhaustion of defeat, but the specific hollow echo that comes after sustained maximum effort when the adrenaline finally receives permission to leave. The Zurich negotiations had taken 72 hours of near-continuous focus. The flight home from Zurich had given her 6 hours of sleep. This final leg to San Francisco, to her house, her bed, the California morning light she had been promising herself for 3 weeks, was the last distance between her and rest. Her phone buzzed on the armrest beside her. Marcus Webb, her executive assistant, a man she had recruited from a top strategy consulting firm 4 years ago because he was the only person in 3 rounds of interviews who had answered her hardest question. What do you do when you're wrong? Without hesitating or hedging or pivoting to a story about a team effort. He had looked at her and said, "I say so immediately. Then I fix it." She had hired him on the spot. Dr. Osei, board, is euphoric. Press release scheduled for market open tomorrow. Car confirmed at SFO. The Zurich team sent champagne to the office. "Anything you need tonight," she typed back without looking away from the tarmac. "Thank you, Marcus. Nothing tonight. See you Monday." She took a long, slow sip of sparkling water. The small bubbles were cold and clean against her throat. She watched a ground crew member in a yellow vest direct a tug backward with 2 precise hand signals, perfectly executed, perfectly received. The tug moved exactly where it was supposed to go. She thought that's all any of it is, really. Precision, repetition, knowing your role and doing it without ego. Near the bar, the 2 businessmen were in conversation, louder now the way men get after 2 drinks when the audience is only each other. She caught fragments without trying. Materials science is where the real money is going in the next 5 years. Yeah, aerospace applications alone. If you know the right people in that space. She did not smile, but something in her expression shifted, just fractionally, just for a moment, in the way that a person's face shifts when they hear something privately, specifically ironic. They had no idea. The woman they had glanced at and filed away as irrelevant was the person who had spent the last 72 hours in Zurich reshaping the economics of the exact industry they were currently theorizing about from a leather bar stool in a Manhattan airport lounge. She did not correct them. She never corrected strangers who underestimated her in lounges or on planes or in lobbies. She had learned a long time ago that correction in those moments served no one. The world would show them in its own time. It always did. The pre-boarding announcement for North Star Flight 1942 came softly through the lounge speakers. First class and priority passengers invited to begin boarding at gate C-14. Amara Osei finished her sparkling water. She reached for the Birkin and settled the familiar weight of it on her shoulder. She gave a small, genuine smile to Gabrielle, the lounge attendant, a warm-faced Hispanic woman in her 30s who had brought the water without being asked, and whose name Amara had read on her tag and used in her thank you, and walked toward the gate. At gate C-14, Sophia Reyes scanned her boarding pass with a professional smile that was also a real one. "Welcome, Dr. Osei. Seat 1A. Have a wonderful flight." "Thank you, Sophia," Amara said. "You too." It was the last warm thing anyone on that aircraft would say to her for the next 51 minutes. She walked down the jet bridge at a pace that was unhurried but not slow, the walk of a woman who has somewhere to be and knows exactly how to get there. The antiseptic cool of the enclosed corridor and the low electrical hum of the auxiliary power unit filled the space around her. Beneath her feet, the textured floor of the bridge gave slightly, the way all jet bridges do, as though the structure itself is aware of its own impermanence. She had walked down thousands of jet bridges. She had not always had the boarding pass for the front cabin. Dr. Amara Osei was born in Cleveland, Ohio, the second child and only daughter of a pediatric nurse named Grace and a mechanic named Edmund, who worked for a regional trucking company and kept a set of encyclopedias on the living room shelf because he believed with a conviction that was quiet but total that knowledge was the one thing the world could not repossess. She grew up in a house where things were repaired rather than replaced, where dinner was on the table at 6:30 because Grace worked the early shift and Edmund picked up Amara and her brother from school on his way home. And no one had the energy or the patience for waiting. It was not a poor house. It was not a rich one. It was a precise house, a house run on the principle that you worked for what you had, you took care of what you worked for, and you never, under any circumstances, let someone else define the ceiling of what you were capable of. Edmund Osei said that last part often. He said it the way some fathers say, "I love you," automatically, consistently, because he meant it, and because repetition was how important things became permanent. She was 12 years old when she took apart the family microwave. It had been making a sound, a low, intermittent whir that escalated once every 40 seconds into something sharper and more insistent. Grace wanted to call a repairman. Edmund said they'd look at it on Saturday. Amara did not wait for Saturday. On a Wednesday afternoon in October, while her brother was at basketball practice and her parents were still at work, she laid the microwave on its back on the kitchen table, unscrewed the outer casing with her father's Phillips head, and opened it the way a surgeon opens a patient, with curiosity, not aggression, careful to note where each piece came from so she could return it exactly. Inside, she found a loose magnetron coupling, a small component simple to reseat if you knew what you were looking at. She knew what she was looking at. She wasn't certain how she knew, she just did. She reassembled the microwave. She plugged it in. She ran it for 30 seconds on high with a cup of water. No sound. Perfect function. When Edmund came home and found the microwave back on the counter and the screwdriver returned to the toolbox in the garage, he stood in the kitchen for a long moment and then he went and found Amara in her room and he said, "You didn't wait for Saturday." She said, "It wasn't broken in a Saturday way." Edmund looked at her for a very long moment. Then he laughed, a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere genuinely surprised, and he said, "Okay. All right then." She received a full scholarship to Howard University, becoming the first person in her family to attend a 4-year college. She studied chemistry and materials science. She was extraordinary at both and modest about neither. Not in the arrogant way, but in the factual way, the way you are modest about being tall because tallness is simply what you are, not a thing you performed. She graduated top of her cohort. She got into MIT. MIT was different. MIT was a place where extraordinary was the floor, not the ceiling, and the pressure of that was something Amara had not fully anticipated. She adapted. She always adapted. What she had not anticipated, and never fully adapted to because some things you simply learn to carry rather than dissolve, was the friction. 3 professors. 3 separate conversations across her 6 years at MIT. 3 different men who, in 3 different ways with 3 different vocabularies of discouragement, suggested to her that she might want to consider a different direction. Not materials science, not engineering. Something adjacent, something perhaps more suitable, something, and this was always the unspoken word hovering behind the suggestion, easier. She remembered all 3 conversations in perfect detail. She was not angry about them anymore. But she remembered them. She used them the way her father used the encyclopedias, as reference material, as things that had taught her something worth knowing. What they had taught her was this. The people who told you the ceiling was lower than it was were not always malicious. Sometimes they were simply people who had looked at you and calculated incorrectly. The correct response was not to argue with the calculation. The correct response was to build something so large and so undeniable that the calculation became obviously permanently wrong. She got her doctorate in materials science from MIT. She completed 2 postdoctoral fellowships, one in Cambridge, one in Seoul. She published 11 papers in peer-reviewed journals. 3 of them were cited by researchers at NASA. She was 31 when she launched Osei Advanced Materials from a rented lab in Baltimore. The lab was small. 2 benches, 1 fume hood, a lease that cost more per month than her first apartment. She had 2 patents, $40,000 in savings, and a hypothesis about carbon fiber composite bonding that she had been developing in the margins of notebooks for 8 years. She worked 14-hour days. She ate at her desk. She lived in a studio apartment 4 blocks from the lab and walked to work every morning and walked home every night. And on the days when the exhaustion was the kind that sat behind the eyes and made simple tasks feel enormous, she would stop on the sidewalk outside the lab and say quietly to no one in particular, "Edmund didn't wait for Saturday. Neither do you." 15 years later, $14.2 billion. That was the current valuation of OSE Advanced Materials as of last quarter's report. Satellites, deep space probes, defense applications, commercial aerospace, a global workforce of 4,000 people in 11 countries, a research campus in Baltimore that now occupied an entire city block. The rented lab was a coffee shop. She still walked to her Baltimore office when she was in town. She still ate at her desk more often than not. She still wore the Longines on her wrist. She flew commercial when the logistics made sense because she believed in staying tethered to the ordinary world. The world of gate agents and boarding passes and sparkling water in airport lounges. The world that most of her employees and all of her customers inhabited. She believed that leaders who stopped experiencing the ordinary world eventually stopped understanding it. And she had never once in 15 years been willing to stop understanding something. She did not perform her success. She did not wear it like armor or display it like a trophy. She was still at her core the girl who fixed the microwave on a Wednesday afternoon because it wasn't broken in a Saturday way. She was still Edmund's daughter, believing that knowledge was the one thing the world could not repossess, that the ceiling was always a variable, and that precision applied consistently could dissolve almost any obstacle. Almost. Some obstacles were not variables. Some obstacles were choices made by people who had decided without data, without inquiry, without a moment of genuine consideration what a person was worth, based entirely on what that person looked like when they walked through a door. Those obstacles did not dissolve. Those obstacles were purchased. She reached the aircraft. The first-class cabin of the Bombardier CRJ-900 was small. 12 seats in a 1-2 configuration, 2 rows of single seats on the left and double seats on the right, separated from the main cabin by a drawn curtain and the invisible architecture of a tiered pricing structure. It was not a glamorous space. No lie-flat beds, no privacy screens, just slightly wider seats, slightly more legroom, slightly better pillows, and the understanding that the people occupying this section had paid a premium for the slightly. Amara stepped aboard and turned left. Brenda Marsh was stationed at the entrance to the galley, mid-40s, senior flight attendant name tag, straight hair pulled back with professional precision. She had the bearing of a woman who took her role as gatekeeper of this small space seriously. Her smile, when it appeared, was the kind that lived entirely on the surface, deployed on cue, withdrawn the moment the cue passed. It appeared now, for approximately 1.5 seconds. "Good evening," Brenda said. "Good evening," Amara replied, already moving toward 1A. She noticed it immediately. A man's suit jacket draped over seat 1C. Someone had pre-claimed the area. The jacket was expensive charcoal wool, well cut. Its owner was somewhere on the jet bridge or in the terminal, expected back. Seat 1A was empty. Amara reached up to open the overhead bin. "Can I help you with something?" Brenda's voice came from behind her. Not the helpful kind of "can I help you," but the other kind. The checkpoint kind. The kind that is really saying state your business and make it convincing. Amara lowered her arm slowly, turned to face her. "Just getting settled in, 1A. Thank you." Brenda's eyes moved, a fraction almost imperceptible toward the cockpit door, then back. Her expression remained professionally neutral, which is to say it revealed nothing and communicated everything. "There may be a small issue with that assignment. Could you just wait right here for a moment?" The prickle. Amara had a name for it, privately, though she had never said the name out loud to anyone. It was the particular physical sensation, not quite cold, not quite heat, somewhere in the skin between the shoulder blades and the back of the neck, that arrived whenever she entered a space and the space tried to redirect her. She had felt it in her first week at Howard, when an upperclassman in her chemistry lab had looked at her schedule and said, "That's an ambitious load for a first semester. Are you sure?" She had felt it at MIT, in 3 separate offices in 3 separate conversations. She had felt it in the lobbies of hotels, and the showrooms of car dealerships, and the reception areas of investment firms where she had arrived to pitch and been offered the waiting chairs while men with smaller portfolios and louder voices were waved straight through. She recognized it the way you recognize weather, not as a surprise, but as information about current conditions. She held her boarding pass in one hand loosely. "The gate agent confirmed my seat 5 minutes ago," she said. Nothing more. Her voice was level. She offered no additional information, no elaboration, no preemptive defense. She had learned decades ago that preemptive defense was a form of conceding that a defense was necessary. She owed no defense. She had a boarding pass. That was the beginning and the end of the relevant facts. Brenda's smile tightened at the corners, a micro-expression of someone recalculating, and then she said, "Of course. Just let me quickly verify." And she moved toward the cockpit door. Not toward a computer, not toward a tablet with the passenger manifest. Toward the cockpit door. Liam Torres was visible in the galley doorway, late 20s, Hispanic junior flight attendant, a face that held the particular quality of someone who was paying careful attention and wishing very much that he was somewhere else. He had dark eyes and the build of someone who ran on weekends and the slightly forward lean of a person who was trying to make himself useful in a situation that had not yet declared what kind of situation it was. His eyes met Amara's briefly. She read him in that half-second. He was not complicit. He was not an ally. He was standing in the middle of something he had seen before. The shape of it was familiar enough to him that his discomfort was not confusion, and he did not yet know what to do with the fact that the familiar thing was wrong. She held his gaze for one beat. He looked away first, not with hostility, with shame. She understood. She turned back to face the cabin, did not take a step backward, did not move to another seat, did not busy herself with her phone or her bag or any of the small performances of someone who is pretending not to be affected. She simply stood in the aisle of seat 1A and waited with the patience of a woman who had been waiting her entire life and had decided some years ago that the waiting itself was not surrender, it was calculation. Brenda had disappeared through the cockpit door. The cabin around her continued in its ordinary rhythms. A passenger adjusting a reading light, the soft percussion of someone fitting a bag into an overhead bin 3 rows back, the muted sounds of boarding from the economy section. No one in first class spoke to her or acknowledged the interaction. They had noticed. She could feel that they had noticed, but no one spoke. Liam Torres had retreated to the far end of the galley and was arranging cups with unnecessary care. The cockpit door opened. He filled the doorframe. That was the first impression Captain Roy Harlan always made. Not because he was exceptionally tall, but because he held himself as though he were. Silver-haired, late 50s, with the particular fitness of a man who golfs twice a week and considers that sufficient. His uniform was perfect in the way that uniforms become perfect after decades of wearing them. Automatic, unconscious, a second skin. The wings on his left chest caught the overhead light. He looked past Amara first, addressed Brenda. "Is there a problem here?" His voice was the kind of voice that had been trained over 30 years to project command in enclosed metal spaces. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried the structural confidence of a man who has not in living memory entered a room where he was not the most authoritative presence. He turned to Amara. The look was slow, head to foot and back again. Her loafers, her travel blazer, the boarding pass in her hand. He performed the assessment with no effort to conceal it, because in his world the assessment was the right of the assessor. He was the captain. It was his aircraft. These were his standards to apply. He did not see a doctorate. He did not see a company valuation or a Zurich contract or a rented lab in Baltimore that had become over 15 years of 14-hour days one of the most consequential materials science firms on the planet. He saw a black woman in simple clothes in a seat he had already decided she did not belong in, and his face settled into the expression of a man for whom this conclusion required no further consideration. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said. The apology was not an apology. It was punctuation, a courtesy marker before the sentence that mattered. "There's no space for you in this cabin." The words landed in the air of the small cabin and stayed there. Amara met his gaze. "My boarding pass is for seat 1A. It was issued by your airline. Her voice was even, not performing calm. Actually calm in the way a measuring instrument is calm, designed to read conditions accurately, regardless of what those conditions are. Harlan crossed his arms. It was a specific kind of arm crossing, not the defensive kind, but the declarative kind. The gesture of a man who is signaling that the conversation has already ended and is now proceeding through its formal conclusion. We had a last-minute equipment adjustment. Weight and balance protocols for this aircraft configuration require us to redistribute the passenger load in the forward section before departure. It's a safety matter. He delivered this with the conviction of someone who has used it before. It was technical enough to sound official. It was vague enough to be unfalsifiable. It was designed to be the kind of explanation that a reasonable person would hear and accept, because questioning it would mean questioning flight safety, which no reasonable person would do. He had used it before. It had always worked before. Amara let the explanation land. She let it sit for exactly 2 seconds. Then she turned her head, a small, deliberate movement, and looked at the seats around her. The other passengers in first class, all white, all seated, all unbothered. No one else had been approached. No one else had been told about weight and balance protocols. No one else was standing in the aisle with their boarding pass in their hand waiting to be redirected to economy. She turned back to Harlan. Has the gentleman in 1C also been moved for this safety matter? Something crossed his face, a tightening. The barely visible signature of a man whose script has encountered an unscheduled line. That's not your concern. Economy has available seating. Brenda will assist you in finding something suitable. At the back of first class, Nadia Cruz sat in the last row, left seat, with the particular stillness of a person trying to be invisible. She was 34, Hispanic, a travel journalist who had been covering aviation and hospitality for 9 years. She had a carry-on under the seat in front of her, and a phone that her right thumb was hovering over without quite touching. She had been watching since Amara stepped aboard. She had been watching with the trained attention of someone who writes about these spaces for a living, and knows from 9 years of experience exactly what she was watching. Her thumb was very still. "Captain." Amara's voice dropped slightly, not to a whisper, but to something with more precision, forcing him to focus. "You are making a very serious mistake, and it has nothing to do with weight and balance." Harlan's chin came up, the posture shift of a man invoking final authority. "I am the captain of this aircraft. My word on this flight is final." He held her gaze with the flat denim eyes. "You can take the seat offered in economy, or you can be removed from the flight entirely. Those are your options. I suggest you choose quickly as we have a departure schedule to maintain." He waited. He had said this before, too. The choice presented as binary, the timer as leverage. The implicit message that the reasonable thing, the easy thing, was to simply comply, to fold quietly to avoid making a scene that would only end with security and embarrassment, and the same outcome, but with witnesses and documentation, and a far worse memory to carry home. He was right that it was a choice. He was wrong about who was making it. Amara held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded, once, slowly, with the deliberate quality of someone filing a document. "You're right, Captain," she said. "The choice is mine." Nadia Cruz's thumb touched her screen. She opened her notes app. She began to type. The sound of footsteps on the jet bridge, purposeful, unhurried, the footsteps of someone who has completed one thing and is now moving to the next. Derek Fowler appeared in the aircraft's doorway, late 30s, a Patagonia vest over a blue Oxford shirt with the collar undone, an Apple Watch on one wrist and a gold university ring on the right hand. The build of someone who had played lacrosse in college and still thought about it. He had the easy, forward-leaning momentum of a man who had never in the entire architecture of his adult life walked into a space and wondered if it was for him. Every space was for him. He had simply never been given a reason to think otherwise. He nodded at Harlan with the effortless familiarity of someone greeting a peer. "Sorry, Captain. Had to finish up a call. You know how it goes." Harlan's entire body changed. It was not a dramatic change. It was not a performance. It was the small, involuntary reconfiguration of a person relaxing into their preferred world. The locked jaw softened by a degree. The crossed arms dropped. The flat denim eyes acquired something warmer, something that could almost be described as collegial. "No problem at all, Mr. Fowler. Right on time." Fowler moved into the cabin, glanced briefly at the overhead bin situation, and then his eyes landed on Amara standing in the aisle. And he smiled, vaguely. The smile of someone who assumes the other person in the aisle will simply move, because in his experience, people in aisles move for him. He was looking at her as an obstacle. He did not yet understand that she was the answer to a question he hadn't known was being asked. "Oh, excuse me," he said pleasantly, gesturing toward 1A. Harlan gestured with him. "Your seat is right there, Mr. Fowler." And Fowler moved to 1A and sat down. In her boarding pass, in the seat that had been issued to Dr. Amara Osei of Osei Advanced Materials by the airline's own system, confirmed by the gate agent Sophia Reyes 4 minutes before boarding, and then removed from her by a man with silver wings on his chest, who had looked at her and made a decision. The final piece of the picture clicked into place with the cold clarity of a proof completing itself. This had never been about weight and balance. There was no equipment adjustment. There was no safety protocol. There was a black woman in a seat, and a white man expected for that seat, and a captain who had decided without examination or justification or a single moment of actual professional analysis which of those two people belonged in it. It was not complicated. It was not subtle. It was the oldest and most exhausted kind of wrong, wearing the borrowed clothing of procedure and protocol and operational necessity. Dressed up, named properly, but underneath exactly what it had always been. Amara looked at Fowler in 1A, comfortable settling in, already reaching for the seat-back pocket with the ease of someone who has never arrived somewhere and been asked to prove his right to be there. She looked at Harlan. 3 seconds. No expression. No performance of anger, no performance of dignity, no performance of anything. Just her eyes and his, and whatever happened between them in those 3 seconds that caused Harlan to glance away first, though he would not have admitted it. Then she turned and walked off the plane. Not quickly, not with the sharp urgency of someone escaping, measured. One step, another, the deliberate economy of someone who knows exactly where they're going and doesn't need to run to get there. Harlan watched her go. The smirk arrived on his face the way smirks do on certain kinds of men in certain kinds of moments. The small private triumph of a person who believes he has just maintained order in his kingdom. He turned to Brenda. That's how you handle a situation. Firm, professional, no drama. Brenda nodded. She was already moving to attend to Fowler's drink order. Neither of them saw Nadia Cruz in the last row of first class, still typing her phone, angled slightly away from the aisle. Neither of them saw the other 2 passengers in rows 3 and 4 who had put down their magazines and were looking at the seat where Amara had been standing, with expressions that mixed discomfort and something else, something closer to the beginning of recognition. And neither of them, not Harlan, not Brenda, not Derek Fowler, who was now reading his phone in seat 1A, had any idea that the woman who had just walked off the aircraft had 47 minutes before departure and a private acquisition fund that could swallow their entire company without pausing for breath. People like that always push, Harlan muttered to himself, returning to the cockpit. The cockpit door closed. Nadia Cruz finished a paragraph, reread it, and sent it to her personal notes cloud as a backup. Then she opened a separate app and pressed the red button. She started recording. The terminal received her like a tide receiving a stone. The noise, the motion, the announcement for a flight to Dallas overlapping with a gate change for a flight to Boston. The wheels of rolling luggage on tile. The particular human percussion of several thousand people in the process of getting somewhere else. Amara heard none of it. She walked past gate C-14 without stopping, past the curious eyes of Sophia Reyes, who had seen her deplane and was already reaching for her radio with an expression of professional concern. past the families with strollers and the businessmen with messenger bags and the college students sitting cross-legged on the floor with their headphones on and their whole future ahead of them. She found what she was looking for, a cluster of seats near a charging station, removed from the main flow of Gate C14's foot traffic, partially screened by a structural column. She sat down. She placed the Birkin on the seat beside her. She breathed. Not the controlled breathing of someone managing panic, the deep, centering breath of a scientist about to begin. She let herself feel the moment fully, because she had learned over years of navigating rooms that tried to redirect her that suppressing the feeling entirely was a waste of metabolic energy. The feeling existed. It was real. It was the residue of being looked at the way Roy Harlan had looked at her, as a problem to be resolved, a category to be managed, an assessment made in the time it takes to blink and never once reconsidered. She felt it. She named it. She converted it. This was the process. It had always been the process. Anger is inefficient, she thought. It wasn't a mantra she repeated to feel better. It was a technical observation, as accurate as anything she had ever written in a peer-reviewed paper. Anger made noise. Anger demanded witnesses. Anger burned enormous energy, producing outcomes that were at best temporary. A scene, an apology, a settlement with a confidentiality clause. A captain who would be back in that cockpit the next morning, making the same decision about the next woman who stepped aboard with a valid boarding pass and the wrong appearance. She was not interested in temporary. She sat with the Birkin in her lap and let her mind do what it had always done best, not in spite of pressure, but because of it. She thought about the smirk on Roy Harlan's face as she walked away. The particular quality of that smirk, not the smirk of cruelty exactly, but something almost worse. The smirk of a man who has done this before, many times, and been protected every single time. The smirk of an institution that has learned to wear the clothes of procedure while running on something much older and much less defensible underneath. She thought how many times, how many women, how many passengers, how many moments in how many cabins over 19 years had that smirk followed. How many complaints had been filed and settled and stamped non-disclosure and placed in a drawer where they were never connected to each other, because no one had ever made it their business to connect them. She looked at the jet bridge through the gate window. Flight 1942's door was still open. The jet bridge was still attached. 47 minutes before scheduled departure. She looked at the Birkin, thought of the contracts inside, thought of $40,000 in savings and a rented lab and 15 years of 14-hour days that had built something worth $14.2 billion. She thought I could file a complaint. She had in the past, on 2 separate occasions earlier in her career when the circumstances had seemed addressable through existing channels. Both times the channels had produced a formal apology, a travel credit, a promise of additional training, and a captain who was still in that cockpit the following week. She thought I could call a lawyer. She had one. She had several. They were excellent. What they would produce realistically in the next 6 to 12 months was a settlement, a non-disclosure agreement, and a captain who retired on schedule and was replaced by another captain operating inside the same culture that had produced him. She thought, or. The word sat in her mind with the particular weight of a variable that has just resolved. Or she could solve the actual problem, not the symptom, not this specific instance of the symptom. The entire structure that had been generating the symptom for decades, quietly protected by paperwork and procedure and the institutional assumption that the people most affected by it would be too tired, too depleted, too economically precarious to do anything about it that actually mattered. She was not tired. She was not depleted. And she was categorically not economically precarious. She was the woman who fixed the microwave on a Wednesday because it wasn't broken in a Saturday way. She pulled out her phone, opened the secure messaging app Marcus used for operational emergencies, typed 4 words. Clear your schedule. Call now. Then she sat back the Birkin in her lap, the signed Zurich contracts inside it, and watched the jet bridge through the gate window, still attached, patient as she was, and waited for Marcus to call. He called in 7 seconds. Before we go any further, I need to stop right here because this is the moment. This is the pivot. The whole world of this story just turned on its axis, and Dr. Amara Osei is sitting in a gate chair with a phone in her hand and 47 minutes on the clock. And what happens next is going to redefine what justice looks like in 21st century America. But first, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments below. I want to know who's in this with me. And if you have ever been underestimated, if you have ever walked into a room where someone looked at you and decided what you were worth before you opened your mouth, if you have ever been told in words or in looks or in the particular quality of a silence that there is no space for you, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what Dr. Amara Osei does in the next 47 minutes is for every single one of you. We are just getting started. Let's go. Marcus Webb answered in 7 seconds. She knew because she counted, not from impatience, but from the habit of a scientist who measures intervals automatically, the way some people breathe. Dr. Osei. His voice had the sharpened quality it acquired when the message was unusual. The 4 words she'd sent were outside the range of their normal operational vocabulary, and Marcus had a calibrated sense for what lived outside that range. Are you on the ground? Gate C, 14. Flight hasn't left. She kept her voice even, not quiet enough to be theatrical, not loud enough to be overheard by the businessman 2 seats down, who was arguing with someone about a contract extension. Marcus, what do you know about Apex Executive Aviation? The pause was exactly the length of a man shifting mental gears. Then the sound she knew well. The particular rhythm of Marcus at his keyboard, rapid and precise, the way a pianist runs scales before a performance. His information retrieval was one of the things she had hired him for. He had an almost physical relationship with data. He didn't search so much as locate, the way some people can reach into a dark room and find the light switch without looking. Apex Executive, Scottsdale, Arizona, founded 2001. Premium charter services primarily West Coast and Northeast corridors. Fleet of approximately 55 aircraft. Mix of mid-size and heavy jets, Gulfstreams and Bombardiers predominantly. Market cap as of today's close, $842 million. Solid institutional backing, nothing exotic. They acquired North Star Airways 3 years ago as a regional connector subsidiary, primarily to monetize their aging Bombardier fleet on commercial short-haul routes. He stopped. In the silence that followed, she could hear him calculating, not the numbers, but the meaning of the question. Dr. Osei, he said carefully, why are you asking me about Apex Executive Aviation? I want to buy it. The silence this time was different, longer, 3 full seconds, which from Marcus Webb was the equivalent of a lesser person requiring several minutes. The subsidiary, North Star. No Marcus. She kept her voice completely level. The parent company, Apex Executive Aviation. All of it. Tonight. She heard him breathe. She gave him the 3 seconds he needed. Then the shift. She heard it happen. The precise internal reconfiguration of a man who has processed something extraordinary and chosen in real time to meet it. His voice, when it came back, was not incredulous. It was operational. Walk me through what happened. She did, concisely, with the precision of someone who had been constructing the sequence in her mind since she sat down in the gate chair. 3 minutes. The boarding. Brenda. Harlan. The weight and balance fiction. Derek Fowler in her seat. The smirk. When she finished, Marcus said nothing for 1 beat. Then, all-cash hostile tender offer. Yes. Routed through Meridian Capital. Meridian Capital Holdings was a shell company she maintained for acquisitions she wanted to execute without the Osei Advanced Materials name appearing until the moment was right. She had used it twice before, both times for strategic technology acquisitions where anonymity during the offer period was tactically critical. Marcus had managed both. Yes, no Osei name until the deal closes. Premium, 25% above today's market close. All cash. No due diligence waiver required. I'll accept standard representations. That puts the offer at approximately 1.05 billion, 1.1 rounded. I want it to be unambiguous. She heard the sound of a man doing the math in real time, not just the arithmetic, but the mechanics. The M&A team at Goldman Sachs that she maintained on retainer for exactly this category of situation. The Emergency Acquisition Fund, liquid capital she kept available for strategic opportunities that required speed. The board fiduciary obligations that would apply to Apex's directors the moment a credible premium offer arrived on their desk. The legal architecture of a hostile tender, Dr. Ose Marcus said. A hostile acquisition of a publicly traded company typically requires, we don't have typically Marcus. She kept her voice level, but the sentence had a different quality now. The quality of a door closing. We have 45 minutes before that aircraft closes its door. I want the offer letter on the Apex CEO's desk and their board counsel's desk inside 30 minutes. The offer window is 2 hours from submission. No extensions, no negotiations on terms. Accept, or it disappears permanently. A very brief silence. Then she heard something she rarely heard from Marcus Webb. A sound that was not quite a laugh, but was adjacent to one. The sound of a man who has just been handed an impossible problem and found to his own surprise that he is delighted by it. Goldman's M&A emergency line, he said. I'm dialing now. What's the offer conditioned on? Nothing. Clean offer. Unconditional. That'll trigger every institutional alarm bell on the street. Good. I want the CEO pulled out of whatever he's currently doing. I want his phone ringing before he's finished his drink. Get it done, Marcus. Consider it done. The 4 words arrived with a finality that she recognized. Marcus in full operational mode. The precise, committed focus of a person who has received an objective and will not rest until it is achieved. I'll update you via secure text every 10 minutes. Do you need anything else right now? No, just speed. You'll have it. The line closed. She sat back. The phone was cool in her hand, lighter than it should feel, given what it had just set into motion. $1.1 billion. The number existed in her mind not as a quantity of money, but as what it actually was. A tool, an instrument of precisely calibrated leverage deployed for the specific purpose of solving a problem that years of complaints and settlements and non-disclosure agreements had demonstrably failed to solve. She looked out at Gate C-14 through the terminal window. Flight 1942's jet bridge was still attached gray and patient against the darkening sky. The aircraft lights were on. Somewhere inside that aircraft, Roy Harlan was sitting in his cockpit running pre-departure checks with the satisfied certainty of a man who had handled a situation and maintained his preferred order. She wondered what he was thinking about. She wondered if he thought about it at all, or whether the interaction had already been filed and forgotten. One more moment in a 19-year pattern of such moments, each one individually insignificant, each one feeding the same unexamined confidence that the pattern would continue, unchanged, unchallenged, indefinitely. She thought 43 minutes, and allowed herself privately the very smallest and most dangerous kind of smile. Then her phone buzzed. Marcus Goldman, M&A activated, offer letter drafting, ETA 15 minutes, routing through Meridian, confirmation code to follow. She tucked the phone into the pocket of her blazer and laced her fingers together in her lap. The patience of a woman who has been waiting her entire life for exactly this moment, and has finally arrived. She didn't mean to think about the hotel in Cleveland. She hadn't thought about it in years, hadn't needed to the way you stop needing to think about a scar once it's finished teaching you what it came to teach. But sitting in the gate chair with the phone buzzing softly with Marcus's updates and the jet bridge still patient through the window, the memory surfaced without invitation, the way old things do when the present moment rhymes closely enough with the past to call them up. She was 27, second year of her PhD program at MIT. Home in Cleveland for Thanksgiving. Not her parents' house because her parents had moved to Atlanta the year before when Edmund took a consulting position with a logistics company. Home in the sense of the city, the familiar grid of streets, the particular quality of a Midwestern November that is cold in a way that has no drama, just the flat, honest insistence of a season doing its job. She had a 3-night research residency at Case Western Reserve that would begin Monday. She had booked a room at a mid-range business hotel 2 blocks from the campus. Not a luxury property, not a budget motel, the category of hotel that exists entirely for the purpose of providing a clean room and functional Wi-Fi to working professionals on modest institutional per diems. She had a confirmation email. She had her university ID. She had her credit card. She had her laptop bag and a rolling carry-on, and the specific tiredness of a second-year PhD candidate who had been running on 4 hours of sleep and the ambient caffeine of academic urgency for approximately 6 consecutive months. She walked up to the front desk. The man behind the desk was white mid-30s, wearing a hotel-branded polo shirt with his name tag slightly crooked. He glanced up when she approached. The glance lasted approximately 1 second, enough to take in her MIT sweatshirt, her carry-on, the laptop bag, the tiredness in her face. Then he looked back down at his computer screen. "Can I help you?" "Yes, I have a reservation." Osei checking in. He typed something, waited. Typed something else. A small frown appeared. "I'm not finding anything under that name." She reached into her laptop bag and pulled out her phone, opened the confirmation email. 3 weeks old, fully detailed, reservation number, dates, room type, price. She turned the phone toward him. He looked at it, typed something, frowned again. "The system might be experiencing a lag," he said. "Could you wait over there while I sort this out?" He gestured toward a seating area to the left of the desk, a pair of low chairs beside a potted plant that needed water. She waited. She waited for 11 minutes. During those 11 minutes, 2 men checked in. Both white, both approximately her age or a few years older. Both walked directly to the desk. Neither was asked to wait. Neither was subjected to a system lag. Both received keycards within 90 seconds of arriving and moved briskly toward the elevators. She watched this happen with the particular clarity of a person whose mind is very good at pattern recognition. On the 12th minute, the man called a manager, a woman in her 40s who came out from the back office with an expression of practiced concern and an apology that was genuine in tone and empty in content. "These things happen with the system sometimes. We've found your reservation, but I'm afraid the room you booked isn't available tonight. Some maintenance issue. We can offer you something on a different floor, a bit smaller, but we'll take 15% off." She took the room. It was smaller. The maintenance issue was not apparent. The air conditioning unit made a sound like a small animal trying to escape. She lay on the bed and looked at the ceiling. She did not cry. She had learned by 27 not to cry about these things, not because they didn't hurt, but because she had observed with scientific accuracy that crying in response to structural indifference produced no data that the structure was capable of receiving. The structure was not designed to receive it. The structure ran on something much older than individual tears. She opened her journal. She wrote in it for 40 minutes. She wrote about the 2 men who had walked straight to the desk. She wrote about the particular quality of being made to wait in a chair beside a plant that needed water, while the problem with her reservation sorted itself out. She wrote about the weight of accumulated instances, not this one in isolation, but this one as part of a series that stretched back through her life with the consistency of a data set that had long since proven its thesis. And then she wrote, "One day I will own something so large and so undeniable that no one will be able to make me wait in a lobby again. Not for myself. I stopped needing things for myself a long time ago. For everyone who looks like me and has been made to feel like an inconvenience in a space they paid for and had every right to occupy. I will build something large enough to matter. And when the moment comes, and it will come because it always comes, I will not file a complaint. I will solve the actual problem." She closed the journal. She did not think about the Cleveland Hotel again for 17 years. Until tonight. Until the gate chair at Terminal 4 with the jet bridge still attached through the glass and Marcus's updates arriving every 10 minutes and the memory arriving uninvited and right on time. Because this was the moment it had been waiting to be useful in. She blinked, exhaled. The terminal noise reassembled itself around her. The Dallas announcement, the rolling luggage, the particular human constancy of a space full of people going somewhere. Her phone buzzed. Marcus offer, letter complete. Submitted to Apex Board Counsel and Office of CEO. Confirmed, received. Clock starts now. Window, 2 hours. Meridian identity, intact. She read it twice. Then she looked at the jet bridge and thought, 17 years. That was how long it took to get from a chair beside an underwatered plant in a Cleveland hotel to this gate chair at JFK, with $1.1 billion moving through Wall Street and a 2-hour window and Roy Harlan's smirk still fresh enough to feel like information. She thought of Edmund. She thought it wasn't broken in a Saturday way. She picked up her phone, typed 4 words to Marcus. Keep me updated. Ready. And settled in to wait with the patience of a woman who had quite literally been preparing for this moment her entire life. The texts from Marcus arrived in sequence, each one a precise increment of a machine now fully in motion. 6:58 p.m. Goldman M&A team activated. Partner online. Offer structure confirmed. 7:04 p.m. Meridian Capital Holdings. Tender offer letter executed. All cash, $1.1 billion, 25% premium. No due diligence conditions. 2-hour window from submission. Offer legally binding upon receipt. 7:09 p.m. Submitted. Apex Board Counsel confirmed receipt. Copy transmitted to Office of CEO. Patrick Holt. Clock is running. Amara read each one without changing her expression. She was watching the gate clock. 31 minutes before scheduled departure. The jet bridge was still attached to Flight 1942. That detail, patient gray, unmoved, had become her primary indicator. As long as the jet bridge was attached, the machine was working. She thought about Patrick Holt. She knew the type without knowing the man. She had done 30 seconds of due diligence on Apex Executive Aviation 6 months ago when a colleague had mentioned them as a potential logistics partner. Enough to know that Holt was a second-generation aviation entrepreneur who had taken his father's charter company and scaled it aggressively through acquisition, including North Star 3 years ago. Golf club photographs. Conference keynotes about asset monetization. The particular confidence of a man who had built something real and allowed the building of it to become the totality of his self-concept. Right now, Patrick Holt was doing something entirely unrelated to her. She was about to change that. In a private dining room on the 32nd floor of a midtown Manhattan hotel, Patrick Holt was in the middle of something he considered one of the genuine pleasures of running a successful company. A dinner with 2 of his most reliable investors. The kind of dinner where the food was very good and the conversation was even better. And nobody was asking him to solve a problem. He was 61, silver-haired in the way that reads as distinguished rather than old. His suit had been made for him by a tailor in London who had his measurements on file. He laughed easily and with genuine warmth, and had the particular gift of making the person he was speaking to feel like the most important person in the room. A gift he had developed deliberately over 4 decades in business, because he had recognized early that it was more valuable than almost anything else a CEO could cultivate. He was mid-sentence when his personal device, the one his assistant knew to silence at dinner events, the one reserved exclusively for his board chairman and his immediate family, began to vibrate against the white tablecloth with the particular insistence of something that would not be ignored. He glanced down. Arthur Davies, corporate counsel. He excused himself with the practiced ease of a man who had been excusing himself from important dinners for 40 years, and stepped through the side door into the corridor. Arthur. This had better be. It's a hostile tender offer, Patrick. Arthur's voice had a quality Holt had only heard twice in 20 years of working together. The compressed, rapid delivery of a man for whom urgency has bypassed the usual professional filtering. All cash, no conditions, 2-hour window. It came through Goldman Sachs 10 minutes ago. Holt felt the dinner leave his body. Not the food, the warmth of it, the ease of it, the comfortable certainty of a man in his preferred world. Who? A shell company. Meridian Capital Holdings. We've run it. Clean registration, no public footprint. The capital is real. Goldman has verified the funds. The offer is $1.1 billion, Patrick. That's 25% over today's close. The number hit him the way large numbers hit people who actually understand what they mean. Not as an abstraction, but as a physical reality. 25% premium on an all-cash, no-condition offer. Under their board's fiduciary obligations to shareholders, ignoring it was not an option. Ignoring it was a class action lawsuit. Ignoring it was the end of everyone at that table's professional credibility. They're trying to force a sale, Holt said, his voice controlled. 20 years of practice. Get the board on an emergency call. Find out who Meridian Capital is. They won't stall, Arthur interrupted. The terms are explicit. Accept within the window, or the offer is permanently withdrawn. Patrick, whoever is behind this wants the company, and they want it tonight. This is a designed blitz. Holt stood in the corridor with his phone pressed to his ear and felt the architecture of an ordinary Tuesday evening rearrange itself into something with much sharper edges. His other phone, corporate device operations line, was already ringing. He answered. Mr. Holt. His head of operations voice tight. I apologize for the interruption. We have a situation on Flight 1942 JFK to San Francisco. A passenger was removed from her confirmed first-class seat by the captain before departure. Standard incident flag. Holt was in no mood. Handle it. That's what the customer relations team is for. Well, sir, that's the thing. The passenger didn't make a scene. She just deplaned calmly. We ran her name as a precaution, standard protocol when a first-class passenger files a verbal objection. And the passenger's name is Dr. Amara Osei, the founder and CEO of Osei Advanced Materials. Holt Googled it. The screen loaded. Forbes profile. Valuation $14.2 billion. The Zurich deal headline 48 hours old. And then the cold, geometric, devastating logic of it. Meridian Capital Holdings. Shell Company. Unknown. Impeccable capitalization. Activated tonight. Directed at his company. Oh, the word formed in his mind with the weight of a verdict. Oh no. The woman his captain had told there was no space, the woman currently sitting in his terminal at JFK with a valid boarding pass and no seat, was the person who had just submitted a $1.1 billion offer to buy his company. Not the subsidiary. His company. Everything. He called Arthur back. Stop, Flight 1942. Executive operational hold. Do not let that aircraft close its door. His voice was no longer controlled. And get me Captain Harlan's file. I need everything. Back at JFK Terminal 4, through the gate window, Amara watched the jet bridge. It remained attached. Her phone buzzed. Marcus flight on executive hold. Ground crew notified. Harlan doesn't know why yet. She typed back 3 words. Give me 10, 1 phone call. That is all it took. 45 minutes ago, a man with silver wings on his chest told a woman there was no space for her. And right now, $1.1 billion is moving through Wall Street because of it. The CEO of Apex Executive Aviation is standing in a Manhattan hotel corridor with his dessert untouched and his phone melting in his hand, and he still doesn't fully understand what he's looking at. So let me ask you something. What would you have done in her position? If you had walked off that plane? If you had sat down in that gate chair? If you had 47 minutes, and the resources, and the 15 years of converted fuel, and the memory of a Cleveland hotel room, and the absolute clear-eyed certainty that filing a complaint would change nothing, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments. I'm reading every single one. And if this story has you on the edge of your seat right now, if you are sitting wherever you are watching this and you cannot look away, subscribe. Right now. Because what happens in the next 20 minutes is the part that changes everything, and you do not want to miss it. Back in the Midtown corridor, Patrick Holt was making the call he should have made 2 hours ago. The call that would tell him in complete and unambiguous terms exactly how badly his captain had just damaged him. Arthur Davies had assembled what he could in 12 minutes. The OSE Advanced Materials Corporate Profile, the Forbes ranking, the patent portfolio, the Zurich contract headline, the market cap, the private acquisition fund that OSE Advanced Materials maintained for strategic acquisitions, publicly disclosed in their SEC filings, overlooked by everyone who hadn't had a reason to look. "She has the capital," Arthur said. "This isn't a bluff. Meridian Capital Holdings is a registered entity with verified liquid assets. The Goldman team has confirmed the funds exist and are available. The offer is real, and it is binding." Holt sat down in a chair in the corridor. "What happened on that flight, Arthur?" Arthur relayed what the operations report had captured. The verbal account from a gate supervisor who had been monitoring the flight for the executive hold, corroborated by a written incident log from the boarding gate. A passenger, Dr. Amara Osei, had boarded with a confirmed ticket for seat 1A. The flight attendant had challenged her at the entrance. The captain had emerged and informed her there was no space for her in the first-class cabin, citing weight and balance. A second passenger, a Mr. Derek Fowler, ticketed for 1C, had subsequently been seated in 1A. Dr. Osei had deplaned calmly. The whole sequence from boarding to deplanement, 8 minutes. 8 minutes. In 8 minutes, Roy Harlan had managed to trigger a $1.1 billion hostile takeover of his employer. Holt pressed 2 fingers against his left temple. "Harlan's record," he said. "What does it show?" A pause. The sound of Arthur scrolling. 19 years with the company. No major disciplinary actions. 3 customer complaints in the past 4 years, all resolved at the operations level. 2 involving what the logs describe as perceived differential treatment of passengers. 1 involving an altercation with a gate supervisor in Chicago that was resolved with a verbal counseling. Perceived differential treatment. That's the language in the logs, yes. Holt was quiet for a moment, and no one ever looked at those 3 together. They were filed separately, handled separately, closed separately. There it was. Not a single rogue incident, not one bad night or one lapse in judgment. A pattern, quiet, unconnected on paper, continuous in practice, that had been running through his company for years while managers filed the pieces individually and called each one resolved. He had built the structure that made that possible. He had built a company where operational performance metrics were reported upward and customer complaints were resolved laterally, and the 2 streams of information had never been required to speak to each other. He had called that efficiency. He understood now that he had called it the wrong thing. "Get Caroline Nash on the phone," he said, "and tell her we need to talk about the tender offer. Tonight." He hung up. He sat in the corridor for a moment that felt longer than it was. The particular stillness of a man who is processing the distance between the world as he understood it 40 minutes ago and the world as it actually is. Then he made one final call. Operations, direct line. "The executive hold on flight 1942. Is it holding?" "Yes, sir. Jet bridge is still attached. Captain Harlan has been told to stand by pending executive directive. He's not happy about it." "He doesn't need to be happy about it." Holt's voice was flat now. Not angry, but stripped of all its usual warmth. "I want a company representative at that gate in the next 10 minutes, and I want Dr. Osei located in the terminal and treated with every courtesy we are capable of." A pause. "Sir, we believe she's already heading back toward the gate." Holt closed his eyes. "Of course she is," he said. Through the gate window, Amara watched the jet bridge, still attached. Her phone buzzed. "Marcus Holt has connected the dots. He knows who you are. His legal team is preparing to accept the offer. My estimate formal acceptance within 40 minutes. Then, also, Holt has issued a corporate directive to treat you with full courtesy and locate you in the terminal. I believe you may have already been located." She looked up. Sophia Reyes was walking toward her from gate C14, moving with the careful urgency of someone who has just received an instruction they take very seriously and isn't entirely sure how to frame the conversation. Amara stood before Sophia reached her. Dr. Osei, Sophia said, stopping 2 feet away. Her expression held a mixture of professional composure and something more genuine. Something that looked, if Amara was reading it correctly, like a combination of concern and the early stages of understanding what she was in the middle of. I've been asked by our operations director to offer you every assistance. Is there anything I can? Yes, Amara said. She reached down for the Birkin. She settled it on her shoulder. She looked at gate C-14. Please let me back on that aircraft. Inside the cabin of Flight 1942, the departure time had come and gone without ceremony. The scheduled pushback was 7:22 p.m. It was now 7:37 p.m. The jet bridge was still attached. The cabin door was still open. The ground crew outside had stopped their pre-departure positioning and returned to a holding stance. Nobody had explained anything to anyone. Nadia Cruz was still in her seat. She had not moved since Amara walked off the aircraft 32 minutes ago. Not to use the restroom, not to stretch, not to switch to airplane mode in anticipation of a departure that was clearly not happening on schedule. She had remained in her seat with her phone in her lap and her notes app open and her recording running in a secondary application, capturing the ambient audio of a cabin in the early stages of unexplained delay. She was 34 years old. She had been writing about aviation and hospitality for 9 years, covering American industry consolidation to the particular way that luxury travel revealed social hierarchies with a clarity that more democratic spaces tried to obscure. She had seen a great deal in 9 years. She had seen operational failures, customer service disasters, moments of both extraordinary grace and extraordinary smallness in the enclosed spaces of aircraft and airports. She had never seen anything quite like what she had watched in the galley of this aircraft 40 minutes ago. She had watched it completely. From the moment Amara stepped aboard with her boarding pass for 1A and Brenda's checkpoint question, to Harlan's emergence from the cockpit, to the slow, appraising look that had moved from Amara's shoes to her face, and back to the weight and balance justification delivered with the confidence of a man who has used it many times, to Derek Fowler walking past and being waved into the disputed seat with the warmth Harlan had conspicuously withheld, to Amara's 3 seconds of held eye contact and her deliberate departure. She had written 600 words in her notes. She had recorded 12 minutes of ambient audio. She had taken 3 photographs that she had not yet decided what to do with. She had been waiting. Now she watched Captain Harlan emerge from the cockpit for the second time that evening, this time not with the performative authority of a man managing a situation, but with the tighter, less comfortable energy of someone who has just been told something unexpected and is trying to determine how to perform composure around it. He walked to the galley, spoke to Brenda in a low voice. Nadia could not hear the words, but she could hear the quality of the exchange. The particular register of 2 people processing information neither of them anticipated. Brenda's face, visible in profile from Nadia's seat, did something complicated. The brittle professionalism went somewhere else and was replaced by something closer to unease. Harlan returned to the cockpit. Brenda stood in the galley for a moment and then began moving through the cabin with the mechanical efficiency of someone filling time they don't know how to stop filling. She collected drink cups. She straightened seat back pockets. She answered the same question from 4 different passengers. When are we departing? With the same 4-word answer. We're awaiting operational clearance. The passengers were increasingly not satisfied with this. The man in 2B, the window seat gray suit, a person who had the specific agitation of someone with a connection to make, flagged Brenda for the second time. Is this mechanical? Should we be looking at rebooking options? No mechanical issue. Operational clearance, sir. We expect to depart shortly. Shortly was not a time. In the seat beside Nadia, a woman in her 40s had opened her laptop and was refreshing the airline's flight status page. It doesn't show a delay, she said to no one in particular. It still shows on time. The system hasn't updated yet, the man across the aisle said. Why is the door still open? Nobody had a good answer. Liam Torres was moving through the economy section now, collecting cups. His movements composed but not quite at ease. He had been composed since Amara deplaned. He had done his job and done it correctly, attending to passengers preparing the cabin for departure, maintaining the professional surface that the role required. But beneath the composure, in the part of him that was not performing his job, but simply being a person in a situation that had a clear moral shape, something had been sitting heavily since the moment he had stood in the galley doorway and watched what happened, and done nothing. He had recognized it for what it was. He had recognized it in real time. He had met Dr. Osei's eyes for 1 second, 1 second in which she had read him entirely and accurately, and he had looked away. That second had not gone away. It had stayed with him the way certain seconds do. Nadia Cruz, watching him move through the cabin, made a note. Junior F.A. Liam has been quiet since the incident. Not complicit, not loud. Somewhere in the middle, which is its own thing. She finished the sentence, read it back, then added, He looked away when she needed someone to speak. I know that feeling. I've had that feeling. I didn't speak either at first. I'm speaking now. She posted the first part of her notes to her professional account. Not the full account, not the photographs, not the recording, just the text. On North Star Flight 1942 JFK to SFO. Watched a black woman in first class be told her confirmed seat was unavailable due to weight and balance. Watched a white male passenger take that exact seat 3 minutes later. Flight is now on unexplained hold. I was there. I saw everything. Thread to follow. She hit post. Her phone began to buzz. Not immediately, about 40 seconds after posting. A reply. Then 3. Then 7. Then the replies arriving faster than she could count them. The numbers in the corner of the app climbing in the way they climb when something has touched a nerve that was already close to the surface. In the cockpit, Roy Harlan received his second call from the executive operations line. The voice was different this time. Not the operations director. Someone senior. Someone whose tone had the particular quality of a person who has recently received information that has changed the nature of a conversation. Captain Harlan, we need you to remain at the gate until further notice. Do not initiate departure procedures. I've been at the gate for 22 minutes past scheduled departure. Can someone explain what the executive hold? Someone will be at the aircraft shortly, Captain. Please stand by. The line disconnected. Harlan sat in the cockpit with the headset around his neck and looked through the windscreen at the tarmac lights blurring in the evening humidity, and felt for the first time since the interaction at the galley doorway something that was not quite certainty. It was small. It was the size of a question he hadn't formed yet. But it was there. In the last row of first class, Nadia Cruz's thread had been retweeted 47 times in 4 minutes. She typed the next post. Update, the flight is still at the gate. No explanation given to passengers. The woman who was removed deplaned calmly approximately 32 minutes ago. I don't know who she is, but I know what I saw. She posted it, looked up, and saw through the open cabin door and down the length of the jet bridge the figure of a woman in a dark blazer walking toward the aircraft. Not quickly, not slowly. With the deliberate, measured certainty of someone who knows exactly where they are going and has already done what needed to be done to get there. Nadia Cruz raised her phone. This time she pressed record on video. She walked down the jet bridge for the second time that evening. The same jet bridge. The same textured floor giving slightly underfoot. The same antiseptic cool and the same low hum of the auxiliary power unit. The same distance between the terminal threshold and the aircraft door. Everything else was different. The first time she had walked this corridor as a passenger, a woman with a boarding pass and a Birkin bag, and the bone-deep tiredness of someone who has closed a 9-figure deal in Zurich and wants more than almost anything to be home. She had been carrying the weight of the ordinary, the expectation of a seat, a glass of water, a few hours of quiet, the last leg of a long journey toward rest. Now she carried something else. Behind her in measured, professional formation, Caroline Nash, Hamara's corporate attorney, white, mid-40s, a woman whose legal precision was matched only by her total absence of theatrical affect. She had once argued a patent dispute in federal court for 11 hours without raising her voice above a conversational register. She was carrying a tablet and wearing the expression of someone who considers this a normal Tuesday. Beside Nash James Whitfield, the Goldman Sachs representative who had driven to JFK from the Midtown office the moment Marcus had activated the Emergency Acquisition Fund. He was carrying a briefcase that contained, among other items, the executed tender offer documentation and the preliminary transfer of controlling interest agreement. Because Apex's board had, in the 38 minutes since the offer arrived, done exactly what Patrick Holt had predicted they would do. They had their fiduciary obligation. They had a 25% premium all-cash offer. They had voted. The company had changed hands 40 minutes after Amara sat down in the gate chair. And behind Nash and Whitfield, two men in dark suits who were the kind of people who did not need to announce what they did for a living because the way they stood announced it entirely. Sophia Reyes had stepped aside at the gate without a word. She had read her screen, and her screen had told her everything she needed to know about what category of situation she was in the middle of. She had stepped aside, and she had said with genuine quiet feeling, "Good luck, Dr. Osei." Amara had looked at her. "Thank you, Sophia." The same tone, the same genuine acknowledgement as the first time. Nothing performed, nothing theatrical. She had remembered Sophia's name the first time because she had read her tag and considered her a person worth remembering. That had not changed. That would not change. That was one of the things about Amara Osei that the world had never successfully educated out of her, the habit of seeing people. Now she walked. The jet bridge ended. The aircraft door was open. She stepped aboard. The cabin registered her arrival the way a room registers a change in atmospheric pressure. Not with sound or movement, but with something subtler, the kind of shift that happens in the nervous systems of people who are present in a space when something significant enters it. Brenda was the first to see her. Brenda was standing at the forward galley with a tray of empty cups and the expression of a woman who had been managing her anxiety about the unexplained hold through the performance of small operational tasks. When she saw Amara in the doorway, and then the lawyers behind her and then the suits, the tray in her hands tilted by approximately 15 degrees before she corrected it. The cups did not fall. Her composure, however, did something more significant. Liam Torres was at the back of first class collecting a used blanket when he looked up and saw her. He went very still. His hands holding the blanket stopped moving. He looked at Amara, at the lawyers, at the suits, and something in his face did a complicated thing. The particular expression of a person whose private theory about a situation has just been confirmed by evidence more conclusive than they anticipated. In seat 1A, Derek Fowler had his laptop open and a second drink in his hand, and the general demeanor of a man who has been mildly irritated by the delay, but is too polite to say so directly. He looked up when the ambient energy of the cabin shifted the way you look up from a screen when you sense that the room you're in has changed without being able to immediately identify why. He saw Amara. His face did something that would have been almost comical under different circumstances. The rapid sequence of recognition, confusion, reconfiguration, the dawning of a specific category of realization that is both mortifying and clarifying. He reached for his drink, put it down, sat very still. The cockpit door opened. Captain Roy Harlan stepped out. He was expecting an operations representative. He was expecting an explanation for the executive hold delivered by someone from the corporate office who would resolve the 25-minute delay with appropriate apology and allow him to get on with his evening. He was expecting a bureaucratic inconvenience with a bureaucratic solution. He was not expecting this. He looked at Amara, then at the lawyers, then at the suits, then back at Amara. And in his face, in the faded denim eyes and the set jaw and the whole carefully maintained architecture of a man who has been the final word in this space for 19 years, something happened. The authority was still there. It didn't disappear cleanly, but it developed a crack the way a windshield develops a crack. Not shattering, not yet, but unmistakably compromised the structural integrity, visibly reduced by something it had not been built to withstand. You can't just reboard. Caroline Nash stepped forward. Her voice was completely level. "Captain Harlan, my name is Caroline Nash, legal counsel for Meridian Capital Holdings, the new controlling shareholder of Apex Executive Aviation and all its operating subsidiaries, including North Star Airways. I'd strongly suggest you listen carefully to what comes next." Harlan's mouth closed. He looked at Amara. Amara met his eyes, said nothing. She did not need to say anything yet. She had learned over 15 years and $14.2 billion, and every moment between the rented lab and this exact jet bridge, that the most powerful communication a person in a room can perform is silence that does not apologize for itself. She waited. James Whitfield stepped forward, opened his briefcase, and produced a tablet. He turned it toward Captain Harlan. On the screen, a document bearing the Goldman Sachs letterhead at the top, the Apex Executive Aviation corporate seal at the bottom, and between them, in the clean, definitive language of executed legal agreements, the confirmation that Meridian Capital Holdings had acquired a controlling interest in Apex Executive Aviation through an all-cash tender offer accepted by the board of directors at 7:44 p.m. Eastern Time. 19 minutes ago. Harlan stared at it. His eyes moved across the document with the quality of someone reading something in a language they know, but have never before encountered at this scale. This can't be. His voice was not its usual register. The authority had gone somewhere. What was left was the voice underneath the authority, older, less certain. The voice of a man encountering a reality his framework was not equipped to process. A company can't be acquired in. You can't just... An all-cash tender offer at a 25% premium to market close, accepted under fiduciary obligation by a validly convened emergency board vote. Caroline Nash's delivery was not unkind. It was simply accurate in the way that a correctly calculated answer is accurate. Without malice, without performance, simply correct. The acquisition is fully binding, Captain. The documentation is complete. I'd encourage you to consult your own attorney at your earliest convenience. Brenda made a sound. It was not a word. It was the kind of sound that happens in the throat of a person when understanding arrives faster than language can form around it. From the back of the first-class cabin, Nadia Cruz had her phone up. Openly, now no longer at an angle, no longer pretending she was doing anything other than recording. 3 other passengers in the cabin had their phones out as well. The man in 2B with the connection to make had forgotten entirely about his connection. The woman who had been refreshing the flight status page had put the laptop down. The ambient restlessness of a delayed cabin had converted in the 30 seconds since Amara reboarded into something with a completely different quality. The specific stillness of people who have recognized that they are witnesses to something that will not happen to them again in quite the same way. James Whitfield turned the tablet toward Harlan one more time and navigated to a second screen. The Apex Internal Employee Management System, logged in with new administrative credentials that now, as of 7:44 p.m., belonged to the entity that owned the company. He navigated to a file. Captain Roy Harlan's employment record. The interaction from 6:42 p.m., 36 minutes ago, had been flagged and entered by the operations director at Patrick Holt's instruction. It sat at the top of the file with a red indicator, pending review, passenger conduct incident, documented by operations log and eyewitness account. Below it, scrolling back through 4 years of records, 3 customer complaints, 2 involving differential treatment of passengers, 1 involving a confrontation with a gate supervisor. Each one filed separately, each one closed at the operations level, each one unconnected to the others on paper, until tonight. The system has logged your interaction with Dr. Osei at 6:42 p.m. Whitfield said, his voice carrying the flat precision of a man reading technical data. It has been preserved as evidence of conduct inconsistent with Apex's operational standards. In addition, this record now reflects 3 prior complaints over the past 4 years involving analogous behavior, which are being reviewed collectively for the first time as of this evening. Harlan looked at the screen. He looked at his complaint history, the 3 separate entries, the 3 separate closures. The 3 separate instances that had each been managed and filed and never connected. And he saw them connected for the first time, in sequence, a timeline, a pattern that had been running uninterrupted and unexamined for 4 years at minimum. His jaw was tight. His hands were at his sides. Those complaints were resolved, he said. His voice had found something closer to its usual register, the defensiveness reflex of a man reaching for familiar ground. Each one was reviewed and closed by operations management. I was cleared. They were resolved individually, Whitfield said. They have not been reviewed collectively. That review is now underway. In one, A. Derek Fowler had gone very still. He was looking at the screen of Whitfield's tablet from the angle available to him, not clearly enough to read the text, but clearly enough to understand the nature of what was on it. His third drink sat untouched. He had the expression of a man who is calculating with increasing precision the degree to which he has been sitting in someone else's seat, and what that means about the architecture of everything that preceded his sitting there. Nadia Cruz posted from her phone without looking away from the scene at the front of the cabin. Update. The woman who was removed from Flight 1942 is back on the plane, with lawyers. Something major is happening. I am recording everything. Her thread had 200 shares. One passenger in row 3, a woman in her 60s who had been reading a novel and appeared to have the general demeanor of someone who preferred to stay entirely out of other people's business, had put her book down and was watching the front of the cabin with the focused attention of a person who has decided that what is happening here is more important than anything else she could be doing. She said quietly to the person beside her, "He really didn't know who she was, did he?" It was not a question. Harlan made one more attempt. He turned his body slightly toward the cabin, the instinct of a man who has been for 19 years the authority in this space, reaching for the one resource he had always had available: the passengers. The witnesses. The people who had in every previous version of every previous situation he had managed in this cabin deferred to the uniform and the wings and the certainty of his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, and his voice almost found its register. "This is a legal disruption of a scheduled commercial flight. I want to assure you that I am the captain of this aircraft, and I have the authority." From somewhere in the middle rows, "Captain," a man's voice. Quiet, not aggressive, just flat. "Stop talking." She stepped forward, past the lawyers, past the suits, past Brenda, who had flattened herself against the galley wall as if trying to achieve a smaller footprint in a space that had already begun to no longer include her. Amara walked into the galley and stopped 4 feet from Roy Harlan, and the geometry of the cabin rearranged itself around the fact of her presence in it. She was the same height she had been when he'd first looked at her and decided what she was. She was wearing the same blazer, the same cream blouse, the same loafers that had seen better days. The Birkin was on her shoulder. The Longines was on her wrist. Nothing about her appearance had changed. Everything about what she represented in this space had changed entirely. "Good evening, Captain Harlan," she said. She let the 4 words sit. "Then I believe we've met." The cabin was absolutely still. The kind of still that happens when a space full of people collectively holds its breath, not from coordinated intention, but from the shared and involuntary recognition that something is happening here that will not happen to any of them again in quite the same way. Harlan's mouth was open slightly, closed. He looked at her with the faded denim eyes, and for the first time there was something in them that was not authority or certainty or flat bureaucratic dismissal. There was the beginning of a reckoning, the first increment of a man confronting the distance between what he had assumed and what was actually true. "My name is Dr. Amara Osei." Her voice was even controlled, filling the cabin with the precision of a person who has spent 15 years learning how to be heard in rooms that were not designed for her. "You may not have known when you approached me this evening at approximately 6:42 p.m. who you were speaking to. That's relevant context. But I want to be clear, it doesn't change what happened. What happened would have been wrong regardless of who I am. I'm choosing to tell you who I am not because it makes the wrong worse, but because you are about to learn that actions have consequences that are proportional to the person you've directed them at." She paused for exactly 1 beat. Over the past 51 minutes, my holding company, Meridian Capital Holdings, has acquired a controlling interest in Apex Executive Aviation. This aircraft and every aircraft in this fleet now operates under my ownership, effective as of 7:44 p.m. this evening. The gasps in the cabin were not theatrical. They were the involuntary sounds of comprehension arriving faster than people had prepared for. From row 5, a woman's whispered voice. She bought the company. Harlan's face moved through 3 expressions in approximately 2 seconds. Each one was honest, which meant each one was worse than the last. The first was pure disbelief. The disbelief of a man whose reality has just presented him with data he has no framework to process. The second was the beginning of calculation, the instinct of self-preservation reaching for any available argument or exit. The third was the expression that arrives when both of those fail, and what remains is the unadorned understanding of what has actually happened. He started. That can't be. It is, Amara said. She continued. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. In the enclosed metal space of the first-class cabin with every passenger present, and Nadia Cruz's phone recording, and 3 additional phones held up by passengers who had arrived at the same decision independently, a conversational register carried the full distance. My first official act as the new owner of this company is a matter of flight safety. She held his gaze. You cited weight and balance as your justification for removing me from my confirmed seat this evening. I've had an opportunity to review that justification. I find it, and by extension I find you, to be a liability that this company can no longer sustain. A beat. Captain Roy Harlan. Your employment with North Star Airways and every affiliate of Apex Executive Aviation is terminated effective immediately. Please collect your personal belongings from the cockpit. You are no longer in command of this aircraft. The gentleman behind me will escort you from the plane. 1 second. 2. The silence was complete. Harlan's mouth opened. He was reaching for words, the words of authority, the words of a man who does not accept being managed in his own space. The words of protocol and chain of command, and 30 years of being the final word. He reached for them and found them absent, not because he hadn't thought of them, because they no longer applied. Because the chain of command had just been reorganized from the top, and the new top was standing 4 feet in front of him. You can't. I can, Amara said, and I have. She turned her head slightly to the right. Miss Nash. Caroline Nash stepped forward. As new majority owner and acting executive authority of Apex Executive Aviation, Dr. Osei's termination order is legally binding and effective immediately under the employment contracts you signed with the company, which include provisions for summary termination by the owning authority in cases of gross misconduct. Nash's voice carried the flat, total certainty of a person who has checked every relevant clause. You may, of course, consult an attorney. I'd recommend doing so. In the meantime, this aircraft requires a new captain, and you are no longer eligible to be present on it in a professional capacity. Harlan stood for one more moment in the galley of the aircraft he had captained for 6 years. He stood in his immaculate uniform with the wings on his chest and the posture of a man who had until 51 minutes ago been entirely certain of his place in the world and what the world owed him in return for occupying it. Then he turned toward the cockpit. His first officer, Thomas Blake, had been in the cockpit for the entirety of this exchange. He had heard every word. He had not emerged. When Harlan pushed through the cockpit door, Nadia Cruz caught a 1-second glimpse of Blake's face through the opening, the face of a man who had made himself very small and was now processing the wisdom of that decision. Harlan retrieved his flight bag from the cockpit, came back through, did not look at Amara as he passed her in the galley, did not look at Brenda or Liam. He walked down the first-class cabin toward the jet bridge with the careful, controlled movement of a man managing his last professional performance. The performance of someone who is leaving with dignity, when dignity is the last thing the moment has extended to him. He passed Nadia Cruz's row. She did not lower her phone. He reached the open door. He stepped onto the jet bridge. And Nadia Cruz posted one sentence. He just walked off his own plane. The jet bridge door didn't close dramatically. It didn't seal with a sharp sound or a satisfying click. It stayed open. Flight 1942 was not going anywhere with just a first officer in the cockpit. And so, Roy Harlan walked down the jet bridge and back into the terminal with the door still open behind him, the yellow ambient light of the corridor following him all the way to the end. One of the suits went with him. Professional, unhurried, maintaining a specific distance that was close enough to constitute an escort and far enough to preserve the form of dignity. In the first-class cabin, the collective exhale was audible. It was not a cheer. It wasn't celebration in the conventional sense. It was the specific, involuntary release of people who have been holding something. Tension, disbelief, the metabolic cost of witnessing something that is simultaneously very wrong and then very suddenly corrected, and have been given permission to let it go. The woman in row 3, who had observed that Harlan hadn't known who he was dealing with, leaned back in her seat and looked at the ceiling for a moment. The man in 2B with the missed connection was very still, his expression one of private processing. Derek Fowler in 1A had the look of a man who was doing serious internal work. Liam Torres had not moved from his position near the galley. He was watching Amara. She stood in the same spot she had occupied since stepping forward to address Harlan, calm, composed, the Birkin on her shoulder, the Longines on her wrist. She was looking at the open door at the front of the cabin with an expression that was not triumph. It was not relief. It was the expression of a person who has completed a calculation correctly and is now orienting toward the next problem. Outside on the tarmac, Nadia Cruz's thread had passed 12,000 shares. A travel journalist with 400,000 followers had reposted the original with the comment, "This is the aviation story of the decade, and it's happening right now at JFK." 3 major publications had direct messaged Nadia for contact information. Her phone was buzzing continuously. She had muted it, but the screen kept lighting up in her peripheral vision with the relentless insistence of something that has caught fire. Inside the terminal at gate C-14, Roy Harlan had cleared the jet bridge and was standing in the boarding area. His corporate access badge was already deactivated. The operations team had executed the technical revocation at Caroline Nash's instruction 6 minutes ago. He reached for his phone, tried to access the Apex employee portal. The login screen returned an error. He stood in the gate area of JFK Terminal 4 in his immaculate uniform with the wings on his chest, and understood that the uniform now meant something different than it had 45 minutes ago. It was still the same fabric, the same buttons. The wings were still polished. But the man inside it had, in the span of one conversation and 51 minutes, become someone the uniform no longer had authority to represent. Marcus texted Amara. Bloomberg just picked up Nadia Cruz's thread. Aviation industry feed is accelerating. Comment request pending. I've told them no comment tonight. She read it, typed back. The actions speak. Then she put the phone in her pocket and turned to face the cabin. In the third row, a passenger, a quiet man with reading glasses and a notebook, looked at her for a long moment and said simply, "Thank you." She held his gaze. "You're welcome," she said. It was not clear whether she meant it as acknowledgement of the comment or as something wider, as a statement to the cabin, to the evening, to the specific version of justice that had just been done in this small metal space at the end of a very long day. Perhaps it was both. Amara turned to Brenda. Brenda had not moved from her position against the galley wall. She was still holding the tray of cups she had been carrying when Amara reboarded, though at some point during the preceding minutes her grip on it had become less practical and more something to hold on to a physical object in a moment when physical objects felt more reliable than the air. Her face had gone a color that had no good name, not quite pale, not quite flushed, the color of a person caught between competing physiological responses. Her professional composure was present only in the way that a structure is present after its interior has been removed. The shape was there, but the weight it had previously carried was gone. Amara spoke to her directly, evenly, without performance. "Brenda, you didn't create what happened tonight, but you participated in it. You had a choice at the beginning and at several points after, and you made the same choice each time. Your employment with this company is terminated, effective immediately. Please collect your things and leave." Brenda's chin moved. Her mouth opened and closed once. There was something in her face, not quite an apology, not quite a protest, something in the space between them that didn't have a clear shape. And then she set the tray down on the galley counter with a care that was almost delicate, and she walked toward the jet bridge without a word. She passed Liam Torres near the galley entrance. Their eyes did not meet. She stepped onto the jet bridge. Amara watched her go. Then she turned to Liam. He was still standing where he had been standing for the better part of an hour. The same position, the same composed stillness, the same slight forward lean of a person who has been paying careful attention. He was looking at her with the expression of someone waiting for something. Not waiting to be told what to think, but waiting to understand what comes next and where he fits in it. Liam Amara said, "Yes." She looked at him, really looked with the same attention she gave to everything that merited it. She saw a 28-year-old man who had been in the wrong position at the wrong moment and had made the wrong call, and had known it was wrong in real time, and had carried that knowledge in his body for the past 50 minutes without being able to discharge it. She saw someone who had the capacity to be better than tonight. She saw, more relevantly, someone who had already decided he would be. "I watched you tonight," she said. "I saw what you saw. I know it cost you something to stay quiet. I could see that in the first 30 seconds. That discomfort, the fact that you felt it, that you didn't dismiss it or rationalize it away, that matters. It's where the right kind of change starts." He was very still. She continued. "Effective immediately, you are promoted to lead flight attendant for this cabin. A new captain is being arranged, will depart within 30 minutes. Every passenger on this flight receives a full refund and a $2,000 travel credit. I want you to move through the cabin and make sure every person in this aircraft knows they are seen and cared for tonight. Not because it's your job, because it's the right thing." Liam nodded, once. The particular nod of a person receiving something they had not dared to expect. Then voice carefully controlled, but not quite Dr. Osei. "I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner." She held his gaze. "Next time you will," she said. Not a rebuke, not a reassurance, an expectation, which is the highest form of belief one person can extend to another. Liam straightened fully. Something in his posture shifted, not dramatically, not with any theatrical quality, but in the real, quiet way that a person shifts when they have been given permission to become who they are capable of being. He began to move through the cabin. His voice, when it reached the passengers, was warm and clear and genuine. In the back row, Nadia Cruz watched him go. She typed. The junior flight attendant who stayed quiet during the incident was just promoted. I think he's going to be okay. She posted it. Then she looked up and found herself meeting Amara's eyes from across the cabin. She lowered her phone. Amara gave her a small nod. One professional to another. One person who had been in a position to speak and had chosen to another. She walked into the first-class cabin. It was quiet, in the way that spaces become quiet after something significant has passed through them. Not emptied, but settled the atmosphere, reconfigured by the weight of what it had just held. Derek Fowler was in seat 1A. He had been in seat 1A for approximately 55 minutes. He had had 3 drinks in seat 1A. He had opened his laptop in seat 1A and then closed it in seat 1A, and had spent the last 20 minutes in seat 1A doing the specific and uncomfortable work of sitting very still while the world rearranged itself around the fact of his presence in it. He was not a malicious person. Amara had not thought he was a malicious person from the first moment she saw him walk past her in the aisle. He was something more ordinary, and in some ways more instructive than malicious. He was a person who had been offered something without asking whether it was his to take, and had taken it because the offer had been made by someone with authority, and the whole architecture of the moment had suggested that, of course it was his. Of course there was no reason to question it. Of course this was simply his lucky day. He had never asked himself why. That was the entire lesson. That was the whole of it. Amara stopped beside seat 1A. She did not loom. She did not adopt any posture of dominance or demand. She simply stood beside the seat with her name on the boarding pass, the seat that had been hers from the moment Sophia had scanned the ticket at gate C14, and looked at Derek Fowler with the same level, clear attention she had given everyone in this cabin tonight. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice was almost gentle. Not performatively gentle, not the gentleness that is really something else wearing a soft face, but genuinely, simply, unaffectedly calm. "I believe you're in my seat." Fowler looked up at her, and then he did something that she noted privately with a measure of respect. He didn't make an excuse. He didn't explain or deflect or offer the performed ignorance of a man who has decided retrospective unawareness is a valid defense. He looked at her, and he stood up and he moved to 1C without a word. He sat down. He did not reach for his drink. Amara placed the Birkin in the overhead bin. The practiced, efficient movement of someone who has done this many times and expects to do it many more. She sat down in seat 1A. For a moment, just one, she closed her eyes. The seat was exactly the same as any seat, slightly wider than economy, slightly more legroom. The same recycled air, the same overhead light, the same textured armrests as every other first-class seat on every other regional jet she had ever boarded. But it was her seat, and she was in it. She exhaled. The karma that came for Roy Harlan was not a single dramatic strike. It was a series of quiet, grinding, entirely logical consequences that unfolded over the following months with the impersonal precision of a machine executing its programming. He reached the employee parking lot at JFK at approximately 9 p.m. on a Tuesday evening to find that his corporate access badge had already been deactivated. His company email was locked. The Apex employee portal returned an error on every device he tried. He sat in his car in the parking lot for 22 minutes before he drove home. The termination letter arrived in his personal inbox before he reached the Midtown Tunnel. The reason cited was not the confrontation with Dr. Osei, not in those terms. It was broader and more legally ironclad than that gross violation of passenger conduct standards and demonstrated pattern of behavior inconsistent with the company's core operational principles. The language was chosen by Caroline Nash with the precision of a document that needs to survive scrutiny. It survived it. He hired a lawyer. He considered wrongful termination. The response from Amara's legal team was a polite letter, 4 pages meticulously sourced, that informed him that should he choose to proceed, the company would be compelled to release sworn affidavits from Liam Torres and 3 passengers who had witnessed the interaction. Nadia Cruz's recorded audio and video which had been preserved as evidence, and Harlan's complete complaint history, including the 3 previously unconnected incidents now reviewed collectively for the first time, which painted a pattern that was going to be very difficult to present to a jury as coincidence. Furthermore, they would be filing a formal review of his conduct with the Federal Aviation Administration under the professional responsibility clauses of his pilot certification. His lawyer advised him unambiguously to drop the case. The FAA inquiry was the definitive end. A commercial pilot's career is built on a foundation that has no room for formal misconduct inquiries. Not technical ones, not administrative ones, and emphatically not ones involving documented discriminatory passenger treatment. Even a pending inquiry before any finding made him untouchable. The aviation world is smaller than it appears from the outside. Word travels with the efficiency of a closed professional network that has very few degrees of separation between its nodes. Within 3 months, Harlan had applied to 4 carriers. None of them progressed past the initial screening. He applied to 2 charter companies. One did not respond. One responded with a polite form rejection. The story had been reported by 3 aviation industry publications, picked up from Nadia Cruz's thread and the subsequent Bloomberg piece, and it had attached itself to his name with the permanence of a public record. He moved out of his apartment in Westchester. He moved in with his sister in New Jersey. He spent a great deal of time in the morning sitting at a kitchen table with coffee that went cold, while he tried to construct a version of events in which the outcome made sense. He couldn't construct it. What he arrived at eventually, not quickly and not with any comfort, was the understanding that the outcome was the outcome because the action was the action. That the evening at JFK had not been an aberration, that the 3 complaints in the 4 years before it had not been aberrations, that the thing he had been doing in this aircraft and in others like it over 19 years had been running quietly on the assumption that the people it was directed at did not have the means or the platform to make it visible. One of them did, he thought. One of them finally did. That was the last thing he thought about it for a long time. Brenda Marsh found work 8 months later at a budget carrier operating red-eye routes between secondary markets. The first-class cabin she was assigned to had 4 seats. She was the most senior flight attendant on a crew of 3. It was not where she had imagined being at 45. It was where her choices had delivered her. She did not appeal her termination. Patrick Holt lost his company, not his choice, not through any wrongdoing the law would recognize, but through the fiduciary arithmetic of a board that had no option but to accept a 25% premium, all-cash offer. His professional reputation survived. His personal wealth survived. What did not survive was the particular confidence of a man who had believed he understood the company he had built. He understood in the months after that he had built something he had never fully examined. He had built a structure where performance was reported upward and misconduct was managed laterally, and the 2 streams of information had never been required to speak to each other. He had called that efficiency. He had been wrong about what to call it. Late one evening, he opened a document on his laptop and wrote a note he never sent, Dr. Osei. I should have known who was in that cabin. Not because of who you are, because of what I was responsible for. The failure was mine before it was Harlan's. He closed the document. He did not send it, but he kept it. Liam Torres left Flight 1942 that night a different person than he had boarded it. The flight departed JFK at 9:11 p.m., 49 minutes behind schedule, with a new captain, a full first-class cabin, and a lead flight attendant who had been promoted approximately 2 hours earlier and was performing the role with the precise, warm professionalism of someone who has been waiting for the opportunity without knowing they were waiting. He addressed every passenger by name. He apologized for the delay with genuine specificity rather than scripted vagueness. He made sure that every person on that aircraft felt, before the wheels lifted, that someone on the crew saw them. The woman in row 3, the one with the novel she had put down, told him when he brought her a cup of tea she hadn't ordered but had wanted, that he was the best flight attendant she had encountered in 30 years of flying. He said thank you. He meant it. He moved on to the next passenger. 6 months later, under the restructured Apex Executive Aviation, now operating with a full DEI review, a new HR architecture that required complaint patterns to be reviewed collectively rather than managed individually, and a passenger advocacy office that Amara had established in her 2nd week of ownership, Liam Torres was promoted to head of in-flight services training. His curriculum included a case study titled Flight 1942, all names except Amara's, redacted, all events exactly as they occurred, presented not as a lesson in what was wrong, but as a lesson in what a single moment of courage can produce when it arrives, and what the cost of its absence is when it doesn't. He developed the curriculum himself. He presented it himself. He was, by every available measure, extraordinary at it. He had not forgotten the 1 second in the galley when he had met Dr. Osei's eyes and looked away. He had not forgiven himself for it in the way that some things don't warrant forgiveness so much as they warrant transformation. He was transforming. Nadia Cruz's thread by the morning after Flight 1942 had accumulated 2.1 million impressions. The Bloomberg piece, How a Pilot's 4 Words Cost an Airline Its Owner, ran 2 days later and was shared by 3 sitting senators, a former Secretary of Transportation, and approximately every aviation professional on the platform simultaneously. It won a regional journalism award 8 months later. The long-form piece she wrote, published in a national travel magazine under the title The $1.1 Billion Seat, was her most read article to date. It treated the events with the rigorous fairness of a journalist who had been present for all of it and wanted to be exactly that present, accurate, fair. She quoted Liam's promotion. She did not speculate about Amara's motivations. She let the facts carry the weight because she had learned in 9 years of writing about these spaces that facts, when they are this specific and this clear, do not require editorializing. She and Amara never spoke. Nadia had not sought an interview. She had filed a formal media inquiry through Amara's PR team and received a polite, professional decline. She understood it. She respected it. Some stories exist to be told by the people who witnessed them, not by the people who made them. Sophia Reyes received a personal note from Amara, handwritten on OSE Advanced Material stationery, 3 weeks after Flight 1942. It said, "You said, have a wonderful flight and meant it. You deserve the same. Thank you for your grace under pressure." Sophia's supervisor received a separate communication from the Apex Executive Aviation Passenger Relations Office, commending her professionalism and service orientation. She was promoted to Senior Gate Operations Manager within the quarter. She kept the handwritten note in her desk drawer. Marcus Webb received a handwritten note as well. It said, "You executed flawlessly in 47 minutes. That is the last time I fly commercial." He laughed for the first time in 51 minutes when he read it. Then he booked the Gulfstream. 6 months later, she was at 43,000 feet. Her aircraft, a Gulfstream G600 drawn from the newly restructured Apex Executive Aviation Fleet, its tail marked with a single, clean gold O for OSE, moved through a sapphire sky over the Rockies. Below, the American landscape unrolled in all its indifferent, astonishing vastness, the high desert giving way to the foothills, giving way to the plains stretching east toward every city where every version of herself had been underestimated by a man in a uniform, or a man behind a desk, or a man in a professor's office who had looked at her and calculated incorrectly. Liam Torres brought her a cup of tea without being asked. He was her head of personal flight crew now. Calm, composed, a man who occupied his role with the quiet authority of someone who has earned it through a harder path than most. He set the tea down with the efficiency of someone who has paid attention to how she takes it and said, "Initial descent into Denver in 22 minutes. Car is confirmed and waiting." "Thank you, Liam," she said. She meant both things. She always meant both things. She was flying to Denver to launch the first phase of the Open Sky Initiative, a privately funded program seeded with $30 million from the OSE Foundation, designed to place young people from under-resourced communities into aviation training, aerospace engineering programs, and leadership pipelines across the industry. The first cohort, 60 students from Baltimore, Cleveland, Houston, and Chicago. Some of them wanted to be pilots. Some wanted to design aircraft. Some weren't sure yet what they wanted, which was fine. Fine was the beginning of everything. She looked out the window. The landscape below was vast and patient, and entirely uninterested in who she was or what she had built, or the particular Tuesday evening at JFK that had set the last 6 months into motion. It was simply the Earth doing its job, the way the ground crew in the yellow vest had done his job, the way Sophia had done her job, the way Liam was doing his job right now. With precision, without ego, because it mattered, and because they were the people chosen to do it. She thought of the Cleveland Hotel. She thought of the plant that needed water. She thought of the journal entry she had written at 27. "One day, I will own something so large that no one will be able to make me wait in a lobby again." She had meant it as a private vow, written in the dark by a woman who was tired and clear-eyed, and had decided to convert the tiredness into something useful. She had not known, writing it, that the something useful would take the specific shape it had taken. She had not known about Roy Harlan, or Liam Torres, or Nadia Cruz, or the particular Tuesday evening when all the preparation and all the fuel and all the converted underestimation would arrive at its moment and produce not a scene, not a complaint, not a tweet, but a company. She had just known it was necessary. She finished her tea, laced her fingers together in her lap, looked out at the sky. Amara OSE didn't buy a company to prove a point. She bought it because she understood, with the precision of a scientist and the patience of a woman who had been building toward this her entire life, that some structures don't change from the outside. You have to get inside them. You have to own them. And then you have to rebuild them from the foundation up, not for yourself, but for every person who will come after you and deserve better than what you got. Roy Harlan told her there was no space. He was looking at one seat on one plane. She was looking at the entire sky. There is space. There has always been space. Some of us just had to buy it first, and then make sure the door stays open for everyone who comes next. If this story moved you, if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or told there was no space for you, please give this video a like right now. It takes 1 second, and it means everything for stories like this one to reach more people. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. A friend, a family member, anyone who has ever been told they don't belong somewhere they earned. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button right now. We tell stories like this one every week. Stories about dignity, about justice, and about what happens when the people who are told there is no room decide to own the building. Every like, every share, every new subscriber helps us keep going. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in